Well, good evening everyone, and thank you for coming. I'm not using the microphone, so if anyone has difficulty hearing me, I can put the microphone on. Everybody okay? Can you hear me all right? Yeah. Yep, good. Well, welcome to the Scottish Parliament and to this very special event. My name's Rona Mackay and I'm the MSP for Strathkelvin and Bearsden, and I'm absolutely delighted to be able to host this event tonight. And it's good to see so many people here. And can I welcome my colleague Fulton McGregor, who's very interested and is sitting just in the back row there. So where do we start? I met Professor Deuchar, or Ross, I'll just be familiar with you, I'll just call you Ross, for the first time last week. And to be honest, he had me absolutely hooked within 5 minutes of his discussion. I hadn't known anything about this subject until I met Ross, and I was immediately hooked. I'm the Deputy Convener of the Justice Committee and a member of the cross-party group on ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. So everything Ross told me and when we chatted all about this wonderful initiative, it just ticked all the boxes for what we need to do in Scotland to keep people out of prison and to reduce reoffending. We are currently at stage 1 of the Management of Offenders Bill going through Parliament. So I'm sure the committee will be really interested in this important piece of research, and I will pass it on through the committee. But I think most importantly, for me, and I'm sure everyone in this room, to me this seems it's about achieving a better society by holistic rehabilitation and healing broken lives and learning from good practice elsewhere. And it also breaks down gender stereotypes. And I love that, frankly. So it speaks to a common humanity. And this is what I got from a conversation with Ross, albeit brief. These are the things that hit me. So really I thought, well, what's not to like? So tonight I'm delighted that we've got Jacob Lund, the founder and coordination of the Prison Smart and Breathe Smart programmes, to demonstrate breathing practices and to talk about the experiences of reformed Danish offenders. And we're also delighted to say have Jerry Rasmussen, who will tell us about his experience and how his life was turned around by this innovative new approach. And I really can't wait to hear his story. I think it'll be fascinating, and I'm very glad they could be here tonight. And they've come a long way to be here, and I know a lot of you have come quite a distance, so I think that says it all for Ross and all the work that he's done. But there's too many people in this room who really know more about this, far more about this than I ever could, not least Professor Ross Deuchar, who carried out the amazing research. And so it's my great pleasure to introduce him and to ask him to outline what he's been doing and how what led him into this field, and you know, to tell us something about the background to it. So thank you all. I hope you have a really nice evening. We will just go through the programme, and at the end of it there will be a Q&A so people can ask questions, and then just do a bit of networking, and there are refreshments outside, as you probably saw. Okay, thank you. Can I introduce Ross?
Thanks very much, Rona. I would just like to start off by saying a big thank you to you for agreeing to sponsor this event, and for the Scottish Parliament for hosting us. I feel completely honoured, to be here and have the opportunity to talk about this work in this very prestigious setting this evening. And it's great to welcome so many people. Some of you are familiar faces, others I hope will become familiar faces to me after this evening's event, because I think these events are always very important for networking as well, and making new contacts for the future. So as Rona mentioned, I've been involved in this kind of work for what seems like a very long time now. For more than 10 years, I have had the privilege, and I do think of it as a real privilege, to have walked side by side with lots of the most disadvantaged in society. Those that for one reason or another have become involved in offending behaviour, not only in this country but across 3 continents of the world, in Europe, in America and also in Asia. And when I've met these guys, and they mostly have been male offenders that I have worked with. They have often come to a point where they've entered what I would describe as a liminal phase, and Deirdre Healy, in her own excellent work on desistance research, has talked about the liminal phase. And almost it feels like I've walked in a hallway with them, where one door has begun to close behind them and another one is opening in front of them, but both doors remain slightly ajar. So push and pull factors have come along that have begun to move them away from the lifestyle they've become so embroiled in, where they've begun to make a transition, but for one reason or another they're not fully there yet. So lots of factors have come along. Maybe they've begun to grow weary of the gang lifestyle and the offending lifestyles they've been involved in. Maybe they've become parents themselves, and they don't want their own children to go through the same kinds of disadvantage that they experienced often as children and young people. Perhaps they become victims of violence. Perhaps they have grown to realise they can do something more with their life than the kinds of offending behaviour they've been involved in the past. And when I've met them, I've often found that their narratives have become deeply reflective and often characterised by an almost subtle spiritual type of principle, where they're searching for deeper meaning and purpose in life. And the interventions that I've been able to study in recent years that these guys have become a part of have all been characterised by some form of spirituality. And that kind of spirituality could take many, many different forms. In some cases it could be religious, but in most other cases it was about much wider forms or more holistic forms of spirituality. And one of the most pioneering interventions I've come across has been in Denmark, which has been a very important place for me in terms of the inspiration I've gained in my work there. And that's what we're here to talk about this evening, the Breathe Smart and Prison Smart programme that introduces these guys to yoga, to meditation, to dynamic breathing exercises. And as you'll see as I go through some of the narratives and descriptions with you this evening, these guys are pretty tough guys, you know, and they have had horrendous backgrounds involved in all sorts of different types of criminality. And here they are, meditating, you know, and participating in these breathing practices. And often I hear people say, no, that kind of thing might not work in Scotland because of the tough guys we work with. You couldn't get any tougher than some of the men that I've been working with in Denmark. And you'll hear more from Jerry later on, for instance, about his own history and his own transitional story. So we hear a lot, of course, about adverse childhood experiences that Rona referred to in the introduction, and the increasing recognition that adverse childhood experiences are very closely interlinked with later offending behaviour. And the research suggests that exposure to more than 4 of those kinds of ACEs means that you're much more likely to become involved in criminal behaviour later in life, as well as addiction and dependency to alcohol and to drugs. And, you know, ACEs can take many forms: abuse of various types, neglect, household dysfunction, as well as the wider systemic issues associated with poverty and social deprivation. And the guys that I have worked with over the years have had one thing in common: the kind of gangs they become involved in, the kind of criminality they might become involved in, the type of violence and weapons they might use might be very different depending on the context and the geographical location, but the root causes are so often the same. They've experienced these ACEs in abundance during their formative years. And one other thing I think that they have often experienced is missing male role models, father figures. Often never knowing a father figure, or if they have known one, it has tended to be a violent father figure, or someone who has been involved in criminality themselves. And so this research has been very much about masculinity as well as other things. So often what happens is that these guys, in fleeing the kind of trauma that they've experienced during their early lives, and in seeking out the kind of male attachment they've never really had and always been looking for, they turn towards entities like gangs that provide them with a sense of status and recognition to some extent, a sense of identity, but often, of course, reinforce toxic forms of masculinity, where manhood becomes associated with aggression, with violence, and with criminality. And some of the seminal work, for instance, of Messerschmitt, Connell and others, have identified that violence can be a means of enacting a hegemonic male identity where other resources and opportunities are missing. This, I think, is illustrated well through this quotation by Sebastian, who was one of my research participants in Denmark. He was 34 by the time I met him, and he talked about the fact that his mother and father had worked together, and after a couple of bottles of wine, he was the result. But his father had never wanted to know him or his mother. And he said, what I was looking for was that I was overcompensating for being in a family where there were almost only women. I felt I had to be more macho than everyone else, to kind of feel that I was a man. And I sought out the guys who were the most masculine to teach me how to do that. And so this hyper-masculine identity begins to emerge, and I've heard those kind of stories over and over again in my research. I've become interested, therefore, in how we can turn this around, how we can look at turning points, and drawing upon the work of Shad Maruna, the place of identity reconstruction in the criminal desistance process. Are there intervention initiatives and support mechanisms that can enable these types of guys to do masculinity in different ways, to begin to reconceptualise what masculinity is all about without also ending up feeling emasculated in the process? And some of the research, interestingly, suggests that yoga and meditation, these kinds of ascetic spiritual practices, if you like, might play a valuable role here. So when we look at some of the previous research into the use of these kinds of approaches in the criminal justice system, they become very pertinent to criminologists in terms of preventing recidivism. So some research suggests that engaging in these kind of practices might help with anger management, might increase a sense of empathy among participants and enable them to manage the repercussions of prolonged involvement in violent lifestyles more effectively. So, Sudarshan Kriya Yoga is a particular form of meditation, yoga and breathing exercises. So, dynamic breathing linked to yoga postures and particular forms of meditation. It's based on the teachings of Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, the Indian spiritual leader originally, promoted globally through the Art of Living Foundation. And I'm conscious that we have several members of the Art of Living Foundation within the UK here this evening. Some clinical trials suggest that engaging in Sudarshan Kriya Yoga can be a safe and potential antidepressant therapy, for instance, which has got huge implications for us, considering the strong links between mental health issues and continued criminal offending. The Breathe Smart programme was emerged around about 20 years ago. Jacob Lund here is the coordinator of the Art of Living Foundation prison programme, and the Breathe Smart programme across Scandinavia. And so he has 20 years of experience of engaging participants both in the community and, more importantly, perhaps for this evening, in prisons, in using these practices and these exercises. And so often Jacob's going to talk a little bit more later on about his work, but guys that are in prison for various types of offences, lots of gang members, very violent offenders, begin engaging in this programme in prison and then often continue to engage with it once they are released. So Jacob's going to talk in a little bit more detail shortly about the programme, and also we're looking for some active participation this evening, folks. I'm not sure if you were prepared for this before you came, but by the end of the evening you're going to be completely relaxed, we hope, because we're going to get you practising some of this breathing and the meditation later on. But before we get to that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the research that I've done around Breathe Smart. So I am a qualitative researcher and largely an ethnographic researcher. And that means that I have the opportunity not only to engage in in-depth interviews with my participants, and I very much believe in privileging and forefronting the voices of the most disadvantaged and marginalised through my research, but I also have the opportunity to actually experience what they experience to some extent once they get involved in these kinds of initiatives. So I've had the opportunity to go through the Breathe Smart programme myself and experience it and see it through my own eyes as well as my participants' eyes. So I've worked intensively with 20 reformed or reforming male offenders in Denmark over the last couple of years. Age ranges from early 20s to late 40s. Some indigenous Danes born and raised in Denmark, others were first generation immigrants. Some of them were in prison when I met them and worked with them. Some of them were in open prisons, so they were able to be released on a regular basis, and I was able to meet them out in the community. And others had been completely released from prison and were now engaged in the programme out in the community and in the Breathe Smart studio in Denmark. And also interviewed teachers and coaches, including Jacob himself, as part of the research, and Jerry, in fact. And also that participant observation, where I was introduced to the initial 5-day programme myself and experienced it firsthand. Now, this is a really important slide, so hopefully you can see it from your printouts. But Jacob and I like to refer to this as the CVs of my research participants, if you like. These are the kinds of criminal offences that these guys were involved in. Now, obviously, these research participants are all completely anonymised and they're given pseudonyms here. But you can see we are not talking here about the kind of, maybe I have this kind of image of the kind of passive, unassuming Danes. When I went to visit Denmark for the first time, we're talking about guys that have been in the past maybe the most dangerous, the most violent and criminal men in Danish society. Lots of them were biker gang members of particular biker gang organisations. Lots of them were drug dealers, armed robbery, serious assault, murder, double murders in some cases. And as well as that, you can see also they had a range of addiction and dependency issues. Lots of them had been bodybuilders, which very much went with the gang lifestyle, and so they had become very much addicted to steroids. Others had a whole range of addictions to other drugs. And mental health issues. The prolonged exposure to that lifestyle, as well as those traumatic experiences many of them had during their childhood to begin with, and a long-term dependency on drugs meant some of them had suffered from depression, some of them suffered from PTSD, some of them were taking medication for those issues when they first came to engage with the programme. So we're talking about, some of them have even been involved in torture. You know, we're talking about really dangerous guys here. And so it made it really authentic, you know, to hear their stories. And when they first came to the programme, I mean, a lot of them admitted to me during interviews that they struggled with it to begin with. They found that there was these mythical assumptions, perhaps they had, about yoga and meditation as being a little bit maybe soft, slightly feminine in their minds. And they maybe struggled with that to begin with. They also, when they started to engage in the Sudarshan Kriya in particular, which is deep inhalations of breath done to a mantra, they struggled with it. Maybe they found it a little bit hippie-ish to begin with. But they persevered. And what was it that kept them coming back? Well, quite simply, it was the role models. It was guys like this. Can't underestimate the importance of those role models, and also the impact that we're beginning to feel quite early on from engaging in these practices. So I want to share some of the narratives and the dialogue with you over the next few slides. So Lucas, for instance, talked about how once he started practicing for some time, he felt a real emotional and psychological release. In his case, he just started crying, and it was the first time he could remember from the time he was a child that he actually let go and opened up to those kinds of emotions in front of anyone. And he began to look into himself and feel a sense of remorse for all of the things he'd done in the past. In other cases, though, for instance, Jamal's case, they talked about feeling happy, feeling a feeling of great joy and energy, being pumped up, almost like being on drugs without the drugs, once they've been engaging in these practices for some time. Energy, feeling other people's feelings, emerging feelings of empathy. Abad, for instance, talked about in the past, if somebody slighted him, his immediate reaction would be to go out and deal with it through violence. And of course, one of the rules of the gang life is no backing down, no disrespecting. And so that had become a way of life for him. A way of expressing his masculinity was using violence. Now, recently he had had someone disrespecting him, and instead of going out to deal with it in violence, he wrote this person a message and tried to understand what it was that was wrong with them that they had to react this way towards him. So there were emerging feelings of empathy for other people's perspectives. And gradually over time, it was interesting how the perceptions about yoga and meditation began to change. Damon was still in prison when I met him, and he openly admitted that he'd only really heard about meditation in Sex and the City movies. And he thought of it as being quite feminised, but actually he quickly realised it was quite a tough physical thing to do. And he could apply physical capital in non-criminal contexts by engaging in these practices. Jamal talked about weight training. You know, he'd been a bodybuilder, like lots of them had. His whole sense of masculinity was expressed through the weight training. He felt his whole masculinity would fall apart if he wasn't lifting weights. But now over time, his mind wasn't so much in the weight training. He was getting the same buzz from the yoga. And for William, he talked, as others did, about it was the role models that brought them back. So it was the guys with the tattoos and the baldness. I'm thinking about becoming a smart coach myself, although I need to get the tattoos first, and I think I might end up divorced if that happens. But the guy in the TV show, Alfred said, who got to me, he saw a guy talking in a documentary about Be Smart, and he had tattoos all over his neck and his face. And so he said it works for him, so he was his inspiration. So word of mouth had begun to grow, and people were coming back because of those role models and what other people were saying about the practices. And interestingly, through my own experience, I'll just read a very short extract from the book that was released last night on gangs and spirituality. You know, I also experienced the fact that you know, I had these perceptions about yoga, perhaps, before I started, and then slowly I began to change my own perspectives as I engaged in these practices. And here I am in my own research field notes. When the Kriya practice has concluded, I realise I can't stop smiling. I feel great joy, a peaceful presence that surpasses anything I've experienced before, either in meditation or in real time. Slowly, I'm beginning to understand why the transformations that the offenders have been talking about have been happening. If my stress and anxiety can be relieved through this, it's highly likely that their anger and aggression will also be positively impacted by it. And so I gradually realised that actually I was going through my own personal transformation at the time. When I first visited Denmark, I had lost my father about 4 months before I went there. I had been going through a pretty traumatic time myself, a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, and suddenly I began to feel some of that lifting by engaging in these practices. So some of that you might experience yourself later on this evening. Masculinity was slowly being reconceptualised. I mentioned earlier about the whole principle of not backing down as one of the key principles in the gang culture. But Anton talked about the fact that the first time he was honest with himself and realised that he needed tools to support him in life. So these guys would never have openly admitted they needed anyone to help them before. I'm not afraid to ask for help. If a demon pops up, I know if Jacob is around, I can call him. So it was the mixture of maybe the talking therapy, the physical practices, the transcendent experiences they were having through the meditation that was beginning to help these guys deal with these thoughts and these demons that could sometimes stimulate their aggression and their anger. Kumar talked about how he was beginning to see masculinity quite differently now. He wanted to be a good man for his wife, a good son for his parents, a good brother to his brothers and sisters, and a good friend, and just do the right thing. Felix, I'm a family man. I have a daughter who's 2.5. I have a beautiful wife. My new definition of masculinity is the dad. Sebastian, now remember, this is the guy, you know, that I'd never known his father, that I opened with, and had been searching all his life for a sense of masculine identity, which he found in the biker gangs. To be macho doesn't necessarily involve hitting other people or walking around with a knife. It means taking care of your family, making sure nothing harms them. So gradually over time, these guys' conceptualizations of masculinity were changing. They were evolving, their narratives were shifting. And of course this was much more conducive towards criminal desistance. Probably the most profound insights for me though from this programme was the way in which these practices were supporting these guys in dealing with mental health issues. James Densley, in his own work on gangs, has talked about, he's done a lot of work with gangs in London, for instance, in his own ethnographic research. He talks about stigmata that follow gang members around. And one of those types of stigma, unfortunately, is dependency issues, addiction issues, mental health issues, that prevents them fully moving on. Some of these guys had been prescribed antidepressant medication, as in Damon's case. He'd realised that actually, he needed what he described as happy pills at one point, because of the flashbacks to the violence he'd become involved in, the depression that had followed it, and the addiction to other kinds of drugs he'd had for many years. But he told his doctor he didn't want to do that anymore when he began the programme. And he found that he was getting healing from himself, from engaging in these exercises. It's like putting on new glasses, he said. You see the world differently. Before I was aggressive, but I've been a pretty calm guy. One of the other men that I talked to talked about the fact that he used to go into a room and scan for danger. So that feeling of trauma that he'd had his whole life, going back to his childhood, and involvement in the gangs had made him alert to danger everywhere he went. He went into a room, he went into a bar and a nightclub, out in the street, he would pick out 2 guys that he wanted to have a fight with. Now he talked about going into a room and expecting peace and expecting good things rather than looking for the negative. Abad talked about it was like a miracle. I was dead, but then I came alive again. I stopped taking depressive medicine after 6 years. I was so much influenced by the drugs that I was just going around like a zombie. When I started this course, I stopped during the programme. Now, this was a guy who had been exposed to some terrible violence as a child. His father had been extremely violent. He'd become violent himself in the gangs lifestyle, and then his wife had left him when he was still in prison with his kids. He'd been on antidepressants for 6 years, and he managed to come off it and replace it with the holistic approaches. Hans had suffered from a deep depression for many, many years, and he talked about when you're breathing in those levels you do in Sudarshan Kriya, you're filling up your blood, your body and your blood cells with energy. And when you do that every day and slowly, the body is like an engine, it gets more and more fuel. And that's a way to work with the depression. And Marcos was one of the men that had suffered from PTSD. He had had flashbacks, he had difficulty sleeping for many years. He didn't want to take any kind of pills or medication. He kept on meditating, and at times he now says he has good days when he actually sleeps and he doesn't have the images and the flashbacks so much now. Slowly, these guys were progressing in their desistance journeys. Their narratives were becoming much more conducive towards permanent criminal desistance. And in some cases, they had been away from the lifestyle for some years after engaging in these practices and in the programme. It was strengthening those natural processes that were pushing and pulling them away from the gang lifestyle. Remorse, self-forgiveness for the life that I've led and the violence that I've done, as Lucas describes. Damon talks about the fact that he can now forgive himself for some of the violence, and he's now got wider ambition. When he leaves prison, he talks about wanting to set up his own company. So some of the earlier criminological research has talked about, for instance, the future possible positive selves that emerged during the desistance process. This guy was beginning to see himself as much more than a gang member and an offender now. Matthias talked about the fact that he's discovering sides of himself that he never knew he had before. All those old behaviours of not being good enough are disappearing, not having enough are reducing, giving myself what I really need to love myself exactly as I am. And Anton talks about generative ambitions, wanting to go out and help others now, go into school and prevent others going into the lifestyle he had had. So, some conclusions from my research before I pass over to the guys. These practices, to me, it seemed, was enabling these guys to continue to express hegemonic masculinity. They didn't feel emasculated in the process because they found the yoga, the dynamic breathing, extremely physical. but they also were problematizing these gang attitudes and values and performing much broader versions of masculinity where they were associating it with much wider things that were conducive towards desistance. In our own culture here, I think what tends to happen often is that we deal with mental health issues, particularly in prisons, through psychiatric interventions, psychosocial interventions. But I would suggest that sometimes, in my experience working with these guys for many years, these are sometimes experienced as being a little bit kind of stigmatizing. Sometimes they're highly costly and time-consuming. These kinds of programs and interventions can perhaps offer a more socially acceptable alternative to some of these treatments. They're a potential means of nurturing shifts in cognitions, identities and social circumstances of male offenders within the context of prison and post-prison offender support and rehabilitation. And I'm going to pass it over now to Jacob, first of all, who's going to talk a little bit more about the programme. And then Jerry is also going to share his own very powerful transitional story for you now. So welcome.
Yeah, I think I will just start with mentioning that these guys that Ross just talked about, that it's not just overnight this transformation happened. It's really it's a very hard path, and it takes these people we have been working with for at minimum 1.5 years. These guys, so it's not like this. It's really they go through hell in a period of time, and it's really tough work. So, but actually, the funny thing is that when we have to do with some of these criminals, they actually have some very important qualifications to go in towards themselves before they were willing to make a robbery. I mean, it at least means some commitment and some kind of direction, just wrong direction. If this direction can change a little bit, then they have, some of them really have a strong courage. I must also say that if they start to really want to work on themselves and change their life, then I've rarely seen so much honesty that I have seen in prisons actually. When we, so much sincerity, if we will reach that far. Yeah, about myself, I would say that I started working with this about 20 years ago, and I have been in many parts of the world in prisons, starting up programs, South America and Africa, and of course different places in Europe, and I've really seen many different types of prisoners and prisons all over. 20 years ago I wanted to start this program in Denmark, but and I was full of enthusiasm. I heard they started in the United States. There was the program started, the Prison Smart program started in the United States. And when I came to Denmark after I became a teacher, then it was very difficult. There's really such a skepsis about, as Ross said, these people in prison, they want to sit and do yoga and really say, forget about it. We try to contact the government, we try to want to have meetings with prisons, meeting with different places, and we were not even invited to a meeting. Not to get a meeting was not even possible. So it was really uphill. But then we started to do some work with people who had been in prison, and then slowly we started to enter these places. And yeah, now we have, in Denmark we have had more than 4,500 prisoners or ex-prisoners going through the program. And I've had the pleasure, I've been really following some of these people, especially some of these more hardcore prisoners, I would say. I've been following about 300, and we are following over a period of years in the last 20 years. And really, I've learned a lot about things, because in the beginning you don't really see what is going on. When they start to get some resilience, it starts to surface what's really going on, and that's yeah. So wherever I've been, and with any kind of different types of prisoners, different types of prisons, different types of gang people, whatever it must be, there's one thing in common, and the one thing that I would say is 99% of these people I have met. In the beginning, you could not see it, but they are all traumatized, really. But you will not see it because for them they will not show weaknesses. For them it's a weakness. They keep it a secret what happened. They want to look like strong people who don't have this kind of victim behind these perpetrators. And then what I find sometimes really crazy that. I mean, I'm all in for punishment. It's not to excuse people that they should not. I'm all in for people should be punished and people should take responsibility for what they did. But the thing is, you have a prison. Maybe there's some prisons, 500 people, 1,000 people. Some places I've been, and you put thousands of people who are traumatized, very stressed, into a box, and then you have the most stressed people are the people also who work in that place. And it's really like a cocktail of re-traumatization, of violence, and it's just really not bringing better people out. That's very rarely we see people coming out like better. I see very often it's pure school of criminality. A pure school, they get new ideas, new inspiration, finding new connections. That's what's happening. I mean, those people who start very just a little thieves, they come full of inspiration and contacts, and that's just a little. I think it would be nice if we could, even if you want to save money, even if you want to save other people from being victims of people, if we start to have some rehabilitation to get some more energy in that field too, together with the punishment and the security that is needed, it would really be. I think we could save money in the long run, but it's not so popular to say. If you come up in a prison and you say I have a new video camera, a very special one, then you will immediately come up to a meeting. But if you say you want to do some rehabilitation, it's not so interesting, and that's truth. So. I was saying before that these people were traumatized, and actually, if you have a criminal, I'm saying that defenses against the trauma in the end can become life-threatening. So these defenses that these people has, something was very painful when we have these experiences, as many of these people have. It's some very painful experiences. So they start to, because it's too painful to feel, they have to shut off for empathy. Very early, that's what they learn. They learn to function in high intensity in their homes. They learn to be alert all the time. Where's the mother? Who's drunk? Or who will beat me now? How is his behavior now? They really learn to scan. They learn to scan. Is this a weak person? Is this someone who can harm me? Someone who cannot harm me? They have a lot of aggression inside because of what happened. They're used to go through pain and to close off for any kind of physical pain even. And actually all these qualifications are actually what makes a person a good criminal. So all these defenses that they have makes a good criminal, that makes them actually achieve what they want in life. They want to have respect, what they never had in their home. They want to have money, they want to have some status, and they want high intensity, because high intensity is so important to feel alive, because they have shut down. So they need some very strong violence or some very speed or strong drugs to feel that they exist. that they are alive, because actually a very big part of them is shut down, and a very big part of them is full of anxiety. So that's really what I have seen again and again and again. And I think, how do we address these traumatic experiences that these people have? The problem is, when you are traumatized, you have to suppress a lot of things in yourself. That means that when you are traumatized, you become isolated from yourself, actually. Maybe you take away all the negative experience, you try to repress, but that also, the price of that is also the feeling of happiness, the feeling of being relaxed, the feeling of just pleasure that comes from inside is also disappearing. So that's why you need these extremities to feel alive. And the problem is that many of these people, there can be many very intelligent people. I mean, you can sit one-on-one, you can have a very nice conversation. They can even say all the right things, right? I want to do like this, I want to change my path, and they can have all the good ideas of what they want, because now they're sitting in their thinking brain, there's no threat, there's nothing happen. But then suddenly some stress comes, or then suddenly a provocation, someone make a provocation, or maybe suddenly the body starts to have this kind of abstinences, and then it's not the thinking brain anymore. Then we go into the lower parts of the brain, then we go into the nerve system and to the body who simply, these strong reactions from the body overpowers the logical thinking or the rational thinking. So to address these deep traumas as these people have only through conversation and reason is simply very difficult. I mean, I'm not saying that reason is also important, but how can we address these lower parts of the brain? Even some of these way of reacting that they have, they come even before there was any words of expression. It's so deep-rooted in their nerve system. It's like they have learned from their environment that you deal with loss, you deal with pain through violence, you deal with the problem through intoxication of different types of drugs. It's almost automatically happen. And how we can address these things. And we call it, when we work with the brain and down, we call it top-down. We get some knowledge about what we should do, and we get some reasoning. We call it top-down. But bottom-up, it's a way to actually address the lower parts of the brain. When we change the body in different ways, if we change the breath in different ways and breathe in different rhythms, actually we can start to have some tools where people can learn to self-regulate. Some of these people, when the nerve system is activated to a certain level, there is no choice anymore. No matter how much information they have about right and wrong, it's not going to happen. So through these body practices and through these breathing, in the beginning they simply get some experiences where they react, and then suddenly they get some tools how they can calm themselves down. And for some of these people, it's really they get really surprised. They thought, well, it was never going to happen. And there's a researcher, especially in trauma, who his name is Bessel van der Kolk. He has been researching a lot in there was mainly war veterans, but we can see many similarities between a war vet and a gang member. It's the same mechanisms. And he say it's not the feeling that is the problem, actually. It's not the feeling, but it's the physical sensations in the body that then activates those parts of the brain that say, this is high emergency going on now. You have to do something. And those part of the brain that says, okay, just relax, calm a little bit down, they simply get completely overpowered. Because at the moment when these people go around with all these not released traumas, it's activating all these old experiences is suddenly coming to the surface. So a small event suddenly you get colored by all the old traumas. So it seems to be something very dangerous, something that might even not be dangerous. So what we have seen and what the research also have seen is when we start to work on the breath in doing certain techniques and doing special things with the body, then suddenly they get just a little bit more time before an action. Just a little bit short time, and this short time actually means that there suddenly is a choice where there before was no choice. And these small things in the long run really brings an opening to see that there are new possibilities in life, a way to actually start to use this energy that they have, a lot of energy in new directions in life. And also what we have seen is that and Ross talked a lot about, is that it actually also opens up for empathy. But empathy is not only the empathy for other people, but it's actually also a way to feel in towards themselves. So what we experience is, it's not like people become not capable of violence overnight, but after some time we often experience that if they react in the old patterns, suddenly they start to feel, shit, that was not so nice. Before when they punch somebody down, they would often be proud of what they did and see, oh, victory, see how I did, and they can speak together in this macho language how victorious they were. But then they suddenly start to feel that it's not so good, and when they start to go back to the drugs again, it also feels more painful. So that's really, it's just bringing more awareness into whatever they do, and starting to feeling connection both towards other people and towards themselves. And according to identity also, which is a very important thing when you have been a criminal, you have the only thing you have is that's being a criminal. That's your life. That's the way you achieve things. That's the way all your relation is. So during these traumas, they really have been closing down for this feeling, like a feeling about themselves, and then we start to open up for these connections to themselves. For them, the image is everything. What do people think? People should respect me. People should see how great I am. And suddenly we see that when they get this pleasant feeling just being with themselves, some of these people, some of these things become less important, and they start to identify with other things in life. And slowly, in time, they start to find out what they actually want to do in life, and they find all kinds of different ways to live their life in a new way. And a part of the program is not only the breathing, it's not only the techniques, but it's also a lot of people around who has been role models and who have been going this path, and they can relate to these people, and they can start to look up to some people who actually want some positive things in life. So yeah, I don't know, question, we should maybe wait. I think we should hear something from Jerry.
Hello. I just want to say I'm not used to speaking in front of an audience, so please bear with me. Yeah. For about 20 years I was involved in organized crime, drug trafficking, in import and export, money laundering, the whole spectrum. And for long periods of time I was walking around in the streets, armed, ready to respond to other rivals, I guess you could say.
Could you speak up, please?
Yes, please, I'll try. Oh, yeah, sorry. So during these 20 years, I developed anxiety, addiction. Mentally, I was at the end pretty much a mess. And for me, it was not a lack of desire of leaving this environment, but I didn't really know where to start. So for me, the breaking point was actually getting caught and going to jail, where I was introduced to the Art of Living prison program. And getting introduced to, the Sudarshan Kriya and the breathing techniques, it enabled me to start looking at some of the underlying reasons as to why I was living this very destructive and self-destructive life. Of course, there's no quick fix, so it took time. But slowly but surely, I reached the goal. I've been away from crime for the past 8 years, and I work as a social worker with young disabled kids, and hopefully within a year or so I'll be a prison smart teacher.
And somebody commented last night when we had the launch of the book and Jerry spoke, sent me a text today, and they said within a few minutes of speaking to Jerry, they could tell he had a beautiful soul. Now, to me, one of the biggest inspirations I've also come across in another country, in America, in Los Angeles, Father Greg Boyle, the founder of Homeboy Industries, always says that in 30 years of working with gang members, he's actually never met a bad guy. And like him, I've met lots of traumatized guys, I've met lots of depressed guys, anxious guys, but I don't believe any of them are actually fundamentally bad. What I believe is that they're wounded. And ultimately what we're talking about here is loving our way out of this situation and changing these lifestyles. By being exposed to these types of interventions, these guys become more aware of their beautiful souls and their sense of love and compassion. And I think this was summarised really, really well in this quotation from Hans, one of my other research participants in Denmark. After engaging in Breathe Smart for some time, he said he had recognised you're not born a tough guy. You're not born with status as a criminal or a money maker. You're born like a creature who is open and full of love and creativity. And when you start to really feel your meditation, then you get small bits of that way gradually starting to come back. It's my hope that perhaps we can learn and turn outward and learn from initiatives like Breathe Smart. We have some wonderful interventions in Scotland. We've made some really great progress in terms of reducing violence and crime across the country over the past decade. But still we tend to shy away from the spiritual and from these types of holistic practices a little bit. And it's my hope that by learning from places like Denmark, from guys like Jacob and Jerry, we can enable more of our own Scottish tough guys to become creatures of love and creativity. So thanks very much.
Three fantastic speakers, and I think we were all captivated by what they had to say. So we're now going to open up the floor just to any questions you want to ask any of the three speakers up here.
Yes. Would you like to go first? Yeah?
I wanted to ask if it's painful for, when they're thinking of their past, or do they have to shove it right far away, because does it keep coming up, the past for the offender, the former offender? Would that be very painful? Or
Yes, Jerry.
Jerry.
Yes, definitely it does, but with the help from the technique, the breathing technique, it kind of dissolved. So the images and it kind of goes away. Not that it's forgotten, but yeah, you begin to have an understanding what's underneath and what's exactly the cause of the problem, I think.
And I would like to say also that they really get the resources to face these problems instead of escaping from them through all this behavior activity. So also if we, one brain researcher told me, and what these techniques also do, that they actually makes you capable of moving towards instead of away from, and that you get this resilience. So it's a great. They get this experience of great relief when they suddenly meet some feelings that they usually had to run away from or take drugs on. So it's becomes suddenly small victories when they have these experiences where they usually did some kind of old behavior. Now the need is not there so much anymore, and that's a victory for a person like that. And then the path starts slowly.
I just want to add one thing. One of the things about doing these breathing techniques is that Jake talked briefly about it. Is that you start feeling your body and your emotions. When I look back, when I was active, I didn't really feel anything. So if I did something to another human being, it didn't bother me. But once I started doing these techniques, I got in contact with my feelings, and it was not pleasant. I will admit that, but it was it was a way out.
Regular the MSP spoke about you guys and one of your colleagues on justice tonight. I can just say that's three fantastic speeches tonight. I was also previously a justice social worker before becoming an MSP, so hence why I've got another interest in this area. So I just wondered about if there's been any research done in Denmark about how effective the technique is in reducing offending on a large scale basis. I appreciate that it's been on individuals, and the reason why I ask that is folk like myself and Rona can take back to local authorities and try and persuade them to maybe use this. I think it could be quite. I'm imagining situations that I could have used it as a worker, but I think local authorities need to take it on. Is there something there that we can give to them? If that makes sense.
Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, there have been clinical trials done mainly in India about the impact of the process on mental health issues. There's been qualitative research done, not only by myself, but Nana Almak is another Danish researcher who's done qualitative research. I'm not sure about widespread quantitative research. Do you know?
I think there are some research in Norway and Oslo University also. Yeah. I've done a lot on biochemistry of the body and what's happening.
Yeah. But we were talking last night, Ruth, it's just sitting in front of you, we're talking last night about the fact that this is exactly the kind of thing we really need now, and I think we were talking about the pilot prisons that are being established in England. Ruth, I don't know whether you want to say something.
Yeah, just that as a result of the crisis in prisons in England, of higher suicide rates and violence on wings and increased use of drugs and smuggling of drugs by staff, they're looking to trial in 10 prisons, so there's a cross-section of young offender institutes, adult prisons, men and women, to trial. They've only given each prison £1 million, so we're not going to do anything too radical with that, but the opportunity is there to trial some innovative ideas to see what might work that's different from what we've been trying and keep trying again and again, and we beef it up and it still doesn't work. So we're hoping we might be able to persuade some of the prisons to allow us to trial the programs to see if they can maybe measure self-harm incidents or violence on the wings and have some really concrete quantitative evaluation pre and post program to help us come up with some of the data that we know the prison service, probation services probably
social work in Scotland need to justify funding this type of thing. But there is so much quantitative research which is so powerful and listening to tens and hundreds of participants' testimonials about how it's changed their lives. I think it's hard to ignore that, even if we haven't yet potted it into a nice chart somewhere.
We have some nice research in the United States about US Marines who has been going through the program, and you can really say there are many similarities between these gang members and this kind of battle mind they always in. It's the same. They're always ready to. Yeah.
So it would be great to have some trials in Scotland as well, I think. So I'm hoping further conversations can be had with the SPS about that.
Yeah. I was just going to say, Ross, I mean, if Fulton and I managed to talk to some local authorities or the prison service in some way to introduce this, who would actually provide the service? Would it be Art of Living?
The Art of Living Foundation could be involved in that, yeah. So Jata is here that coordinates it in Glasgow.
Yes, so we have Mary, who's the coordinator for Scotland and based in Glasgow. And we have the IAHP team. Can you raise your hands? Shailene from London.
Yeah, the institution running the programs in the UK is called International Association for Human Values. It's a sister organization of Art of Living. And the programs in the UK that, for example, Ruth spoke about in Thameside HMP, they were conducted under that. And Bhavani is here, who conducts the Breathe Smart, also under the same organization. She's the head of the program in the UK.
So any of your contacts would be suitable to contact. I'm not, obviously can't promise anything, but just if we made some headway.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Certainly.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Can I ask how I'm assuming there is an equivalent to a parole board, I mean, how do they view this intervention? Because I mean, certainly I manage criminal justice, and I used to manage the drug court in Fife, and we had a lot of alternative therapies, and it was very difficult to persuade the judiciary of the value of a different, a range of approaches for different people. And I'm thinking if people have been in prison for a long time and have, undertaken all this therapy, then it should go towards a positive outcome for a parole hearing in some way.
Absolutely, and I think we need to change a lot of hearts and minds, in the judiciary as well, about the value of these approaches. Somebody said to me the last time I was in Denmark, it's hard to find someone in this country that doesn't meditate. I think we're only just beginning to embrace these holistic approaches.
I think
but
so.
we're a few years down the line.
As I said earlier, we're currently processing the Management of Offenders Bill, and we're also moving towards a shorter presumption of no short sentences. So community, holistic community care is going to be feature much more highly than it ever has done. Really it's a breakthrough. So this kind of thing just fits so well, and if we can break down some of the barriers that you face, I think we'll do our very best to do that. So Ross, I think you said you wanted to get a wee bit of interaction with the breathing now.
We don't want you to go away without experiencing this. So maybe, could we take one final question first and then move on?
Sure. I just wanted to ask if perhaps any of you are aware of some of the research that's been done by Mark Williams at Oxford University. He has developed some mindfulness behaviour cognitive therapy.
Oh yeah. Yes, I do.
Along with George Teasdale and Zindel Segal, Toronto and Cambridge.
Yes, I do.
Yeah. I was perhaps wondering if you had any thoughts on how this could be implemented in certain rehabilitative programs.
The mindfulness approaches?
Yeah, specifically with regards to depressive mental illnesses in particular.
I mean, I think there is actually quite a big movement starting to happen in terms of embracing mindfulness. I know it's emerging quite prominently in the NHS, and I know that there are mindfulness programs in prisons in Scotland at the moment. Some of the violence reduction unit programs also include mindfulness, as part of the Brave Heart Industries initiative, for instance. So I think that is beginning to happen. But I think this is something slightly different again that we're talking about here, which takes people to a deeper level, I would say, much deeper level of meditation and breathing. Jacob is going to lead us with a few minutes now of active participation, I think.
Everybody is okay? We do a little session? Short, very short though. Okay. So we just sit up in the seats, back straight. And just for a little moment, just close the eyes. And just observe the breath, our natural breath. How is the rhythm of our natural breath without forcing anything? Just observing natural breath. Just observe how the body breathes all by itself, keeping us alive even when we sleep. And then we take a deep breath in, fill up the lungs. Hold the breath 1 second and then slowly through the mouth. And slowly we can open the eyes, and then we'll just warm up the body a little bit. So we take the arms up like this. There's not so much space in here. And then we shake the arms. And also even we shake the legs a little bit, like something like this. And then close the eyes again. And then to really get vibration into our head, we also do like this. Shaking, shaking, shaking. Moving the head, moving the feet, moving the arms. See them doing the sound. And a little faster. And last beat. And the arm stays still up. Still. And very, very slowly take the arms down. Very, very slowly. Slowly, slowly. Feeling every moment, centimeter from centimeter. And just sitting still for a moment. And one more time, taking a deep breath in. And breathe out. And last time, breathe in. And breathe out. And just putting the hand on the stomach, trying to breathe a little bit with the stomach. Slowly breathing in and slowly breathing out. Movement of the stomach. As we breathe, usually all the organs get massage if we are not too stressed. And then we put the hands on the ribs, just on the outside of the ribs, and then we try to make sure that the ribs moves a little bit outside to the sides. Breathing in, a little bit out to the side, and back again. The diaphragm here, the main muscle of our breath. Breathing in, breathing fully out. And then just put a hand on the chest and make a movement of the chest. See if we can allow the chest to move every time we breathe. full air in the chest and slowly breathing out. And after the next breath out, just relax again. And sit with the eyes closed. And then we'll do a little more dynamic breathing exercises. It's called the Vastika. We have the hands like this. And then we breathe in through the nose. And then slowly we go down and breathe out. So putting the fists together. So up, open and down. Up, up. Getting energy into the body. Up, 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 and relax. Just sit for a moment and observe. Just observe the small sensations in the body. I can see the time is running. We just take one more round. One more. Again, hands like this. And before we start using the arms, just normal deep breath in. And breathe out. And up. Down. Up. 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 Up, 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 two more, up, and the last one, and relax, and just close the eyes for a little moment, just a short moment. Just take all attention to the surroundings, the sounds. All attention outside. Somebody's moving, somebody's breath, somebody's speaking outside. Just be total outside. Just allow the environment to be just as it is. And take the attention to the weight of the body touching the floor and the chair. Just feel the feet on the ground, the feet touching the ground. Attention to the right leg. And the left leg. And feel these parts of the body that touch the chair. Just feel the weight of the body touching the chair. Just allow the body to be heavy. And attention to the abdomen. And the stomach. Just give a little thought to all the organs working inside in the stomach. The more we relax, the better they function. All attention to the stomach, navel area. And attention to the chest. Maybe we can feel the heart is beating, maybe not. Right shoulder and right arm. And left shoulder, left arm. Throat. And the face. Top of the head. And feeling the whole body. The whole body. Just allowing all sensations in the body to be just as they are, without resisting any sensation, just for a moment. And attention to the breath. Just following the breath in and out through the nostrils and deep down into the lungs. In and out, again and again. And take a deep breath in and very slowly breathe out. Observe the breath, the natural rhythm of the breath. And take the attention to the thoughts coming in the mind. Pleasant thoughts, unpleasant thoughts, neutral thoughts. Just allow any thought. Just observe the thoughts. A little more attention to the thoughts. More thoughts coming. Just let them come. And you're in harmony with the thoughts. And take the attention to the feelings, this very moment. Pleasant feeling, unpleasant. Just allow whatever feeling that might be right now. Welcoming whatever feeling is this moment. And take a deep breath in. And slowly breathe out. And the last one. Deep breath in. And slowly breathe fully out. And back to all attention to the surroundings again. Sound in this room. And back to the breath. Just very slowly you can open the eyes again. It's just a few minutes. Was it okay?
I think I'm too relaxed to sit. Can I thank you? Such a good experience. I don't think I felt that relaxed for weeks. But can I really thank our three main speakers tonight, and really applaud them for everything that they've given us tonight, and for all of you who've come along and taken part. It's been really special. I don't think we'll forget it, and we would love to take this forward and get it into more of a mainstream situation in Scotland. So thank you for coming. We've got the room till 8 o'clock, so feel free just to have refreshments and just to chat to each other. And it's safe home, everyone, and it's been lovely to see you.